So, a quick note before we start the actual video. This video will focus primarily on the first BioShock. The next video will focus primarily on the third BioShock, aka BioShock Infinite. I will not be addressing much, if any, of the second game. The reason is because the second game was developed by a different team, and it's my belief that the design of the first and third games was largely the result of different motivations. Now, with that said, let's begin. When the original BioShock was first released in 2007, both critics and fans gave it unanimous praise. And almost 15 years later, people still continue to create in-depth video analyses and write detailed articles and blog posts about it. For better or worse, BioShock has become part of Western gaming iconography, and that's why I need to address, what no one else will, about the series. Set in a 1960s alternate timeline, a man named Andrew Ryan founds an underwater utopia based on extreme free market principles and individualism. He calls his city Rapture, and in order to avoid the restrictions of big government and the corruption of the parasites, he seals the city off from the outside world and forbids any contact or trade with the surface. At the outset of the game, the city is in complete disarray, however, as two factions wage war for control. One is led by Andrew Ryan, the other by a man named Atlas, rising up in the place of another contender named Frank Fontaine, who had already been killed in a shootout with Ryan's men before the game even started. As it turns out, it was Fontaine's hyper-commercialization of a substance called Atom that was the catalyst for Rapture's decline into chaos. Atom was discovered within a strange sea slug by a woman named Bridget Tenenbaum, who was able to cultivate from it regenerative and genetically manipulative properties. As was soon discovered, however, Atom was not only extremely powerful, but was also highly addictive and ultimately had quite adverse effects, causing its consumers to become psychotic. With Frank Fontaine gone, however, Atlas has become Ryan's principal challenger. Presenting himself as a man of the people, Atlas purports to represent the collective interests of Rapture's growing underclass.
Now you had the pleasure of Andrew Ryan's company. He's the one who built this place, and he's the one who ran it into the ground.
As most fans and critics have noted, the game is full of parallels to the work of 20th century philosopher Ayn Rand, after whom Andrew Ryan takes his name. In her book Atlas Shrugged, the character John Galt is a mysterious philosopher who organizes a mass exodus of the world's best and brightest to escape the collectivists and build a utopian society based on a radical pursuit of personal self-interest. In BioShock, Andrew Ryan organizes a similar intellectual exodus to build an underwater utopia based on the same principles. Even the word Rapture's etymological roots simply mean to carry off, and that's exactly what John Galt and Andrew Ryan did with their respective endeavors. They carried off the world's intellectual elite.
To build a city at the bottom of the sea, insanity. But where else could we be free from the clutching hand of the parasites? Where else could we build an economy that they would not try to control, a society that they would not try to destroy? It was not impossible to build Rapture at the bottom of the sea. It was impossible to build it anywhere else.
At the game's outset, Jack, the voiceless protagonist, is on board a plane that crashes in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. As the only survivor, he makes his way to a nearby lighthouse. Upon entering it, Jack is greeted by a giant statue of Andrew Ryan with a banner reading, "No gods or kings, only man." Descending within the lighthouse, we discover a bathysphere serving as a waypoint between the surface and the city of Rapture. As we embark said bathysphere, Andrew Ryan explains his motivation for building the city.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose rapture. A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, rapture can become your city as well.
As Ayn Rand stated, her philosophy, quote, in essence, is the concept of man as a heroic being, with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity, and reason as his only absolute, unquote.
In the end, all that matters to me is me. And all that matters to you is you. It is the nature of things.
This is usually what longtime fans of the game focus on, but, as Ken Levine, the lead director himself, said, quote, BioShock wasn't truly about a critique of objectivism. It was about something else, unquote. When we look a little deeper, we find quite a distinct narrative just beneath the surface. Yet, it's subtle and not very forthcoming. Under the banner and the lighthouse entry is a plaque with a notable inscription. Quote, in what country is there a place for people like me? Unquote. Author Cody Klein of Kotaku magazine remarked on this inscription, quote, those words imply that Rapture will be a home to those who don't belong anywhere else, but they also reveal the deep sorrow and pain that linger within its founder, Andrew Ryan, a Belarusian Jew who fled Eastern Europe in the wake of the Bolshevik Revolution. Right from the game's chilling opening, Ryan's Jewishness, and that of many other characters in Rapture, is more than just cultural window dressing. Scratch beneath the surface of Rapture's Ayn Rand-inspired objectivist dystopia, and you'll find that BioShock's Jewish roots run deep, unquote. Now, it's likely a surprise to many fans, but yes, Andrew Ryan is Jewish, and it's something Ken Levine and other Jews have talked about at length. Mike Futter of Game Informer was making a compilation of Jewish characters in video games when he received a note from Ken Levine, stating that half of BioShock's cast was Jewish. But Futter, despite also being Jewish himself, was initially taken back. Quote, wait, what? I had figured Sandra Cohen is a sure thing. Cohen is one of the most Jewish names there is, as it translates directly to priest in Hebrew. And with his congregation of artists that he had assembled, this seemed to make a lot of sense. Levine continued though, Ryan, Steinman, Tenenbaum, Lutz, unquote. Curiously, most people I've spoken to about the Jewish themes of BioShock are entirely unaware of them. The fact is, most people don't have an acute awareness of Jewish surnames and characteristics. And the most explicit BioShock ever gets about a Jewish theme is via some of Bridget Tenenbaum's monologue recordings, wherein she speaks of her experience in German concentration camps.
I was at German prison camp, only 16 years old when I realized I have love for science. German doctor, he make experiment. Sometimes he makes scientific error. I tell him of this error, and this make him angry. But then he asks, how can a child know such a thing? I tell him sometimes I just know. He screams at me, then why tell me? Well, I said, if you are going to do such things, at least you should do them properly.
Ken Levine was clearly dunking on the Germans here. An autistic Jewish genius was so smart that even as a teenager, she was able to correct the most intelligent men of the so-called master race as they conducted their silly experiments. Strangely though, Tenenbaum never actually says that she's Jewish. In fact, the words Jew, Jewish, or Judaism are not used anywhere in the entire game. This is quite bizarre considering how all these Jews, including Ken Levine himself, are discussing Jewish themes in these articles. I mean, one would think that one of these words would naturally be used at some point, but they aren't. What's more, Frank Fontaine, the character who becomes the principal antagonist after Andrew Ryan is killed, and after it's revealed that he had faked his own death all along, simply refers to Tenenbaum as the Kraut, which is a derogatory term for Germans. So it makes some sense that if you played BioShock some years ago, you may not have viewed the game as one whose Jewish roots ran deep. Unless, of course, you were a member of the club, in which case you stood a better chance of picking up on the subtle cues. Regardless, Ken Levine himself outright explains how everything is centered on Jewishness. Quote, "It was less about faith and more about what their Jewishness meant to others. Ryan's bourgeois family was ruined by the Bolsheviks. Tenenbaum's family was slaughtered by the Nazis. Cohen and Steinman were cultural American Jews, but in that time, others defined them by their Jewishness." Unquote. In the Kotaku article, Cody Klein shares his own interpretations of Andrew Ryan's motivations. Quote, "Much like me, Levine is generations removed from the fear of displacement his grandparents faced. He never had to worry about packing everything up and fleeing his country. But that sense of unease, whether consciously or not, is passed down through the generations. Andrew Ryan's worldview develops as a direct response to those anxieties. Like many Jews, he felt like his will had been stripped away, like his world had been destroyed by people who think the world would be better off without people like him. Even in America, he felt like an outsider. Ryan couches those anxieties in his idea of parasites, individualism, and industry. Where else could we be free from the clutching hand of the parasites, he asks? Where else could we build an economy that they would not try to control, a society that they would not try to destroy? He takes recognizable and understandable fears, but responds in the most extreme way possible. He rejects altruism and embraces individualism because his people have been at the receiving end of collective utopian visions." Unquote. Now, Cody doesn't discuss it here, but let's consider his earlier thoughts on the game's Jewish themes. Quote, "Look beyond ethnic names like Sander Cohen, J.S. Steinman, and Brigid Tenenbaum, and you'll find a game that's wrestling with issues that are at the heart of post-Holocaust Jewish identity. Displacement, trauma, the ever-elusive idea of home, and how an idealized homeland like Israel can decay when put under the pressure of trauma and oppression." Unquote. Now Ken Levine tells us, in his own words, what Andrew Ryan's motivations were. Quote, "If you dig into the audio logs, Ryan was born in Russia. He was middle class. When the Bolshevik Revolution happened, his family business was destroyed. That was a defining event for him, the nationalization of all these industries. His family business was destroyed, and Jews weren't exactly beloved in Russia to begin with, but especially a bourgeois Jew. His family came to America, and he lived his life in response to that event, that would never happen to him again. He had a mistrust of government, a mistrust of socialism, a mistrust of all those things. That led him to becoming the guy he was. Even America was too government-oriented for him. It's why he created Rapture. It's all a response to this thing that happened when he was a kid, and because he was Jewish." Unquote. Now, while Ryan's past life in Russia is briefly mentioned in one of Ryan's speeches over Rapture's intercom system, again, no material within the game states outright that he, or anyone else, was Jewish. So again, it's strange that Ken was so focused on his character's Jewishness, yet never explained it to an audience who probably didn't have the knowledge to pick up on it.
So, better luck next time.
Now, regarding the Bolsheviks, and both Cody Klein and Ken Levine's notion that the Jews had been at the negative end of collective utopian visions, the thing is, Bolshevism was largely a Jewish-led movement, and people at the time of the revolution openly acknowledged it. Winston Churchill wrote a whole piece in the Sunday Herald about it. At one point, he states, quote, "There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the actual bringing about of the Russian Revolution by these international and for the most part atheistical Jews. It is certainly a very great one. It probably outweighs all others. With the notable exception of Lenin, the majority of the leading figures are Jews. Moreover, the principal inspiration and driving power comes from the Jewish leaders." Unquote. David R. Francis, the U.S. ambassador to Russia in the 1920s, wrote that, quote, "The Bolshevik leaders here, most of whom are Jews, and 90% of whom are returned exiles, care little for Russia or any other country, but are internationalists, and they are trying to start a worldwide social revolution." Unquote. In fact, wealthy Jews in America, such as Jacob Schiff and Max Warburg, helped fund the revolution. It was even Jews who murdered the Tsar and his family. Yakov Sverdlov is said to have given the order, and Yakov Yurovsky carried it out. Now, there are dozens of similar quotes, citations, and sources to pull from, all confirming heavy Jewish involvement in Bolshevism. Yes, the early communists did actively pursue anti-religious policies, but they were mostly anti-Christian. Lenin even made speeches condemning anti-Semitism as an enemy of the Soviet Union, and what's more, Andrew Ryan was an atheist. At best, Ken Levine can make the case that Ryan's family was fleeing economic persecution in Russia, but not anti-Semitism in an either ethnic or religious sense. Despite his exodus to America, however, Andrew Ryan found no peace. Quote, "I had thought I had left the parasites of Moscow behind me. I had thought I had left the Marxist altruists to their collective farms and their 5-year plans. But as the German fools threw themselves on Hitler's sword for the good of the Reich, the Americans drank deeper and deeper of the Bolshevik poison, spoon-fed to them by Roosevelt and his New Dealers." Unquote. Well, the problem here is that much of Roosevelt's government was staffed by Jews, such as Henry Morgenthau, who not only played a major role in designing FDR's New Deal, but also drew up the post-war plan for the deindustrialization of Germany, which contributed to the deaths of millions of Germans between 1945 and 1948. But putting aside Ken's depiction of historical movements with heavy Jewish participation as anti-Semitic, the game really doesn't explore Judaism at all, in a sense that was accessible, at least, to a mainly Gentile audience. If anything, it explores Jewish victimhood under a veneer of non-Jewish symbolism. For example, the term rapture is Christian, not Jewish. It's the traditional belief that upon the second coming, Jesus will carry away the righteous to heaven. What's more, to undermine Ryan's rule, Atlas smuggles in Christian Bibles, and the game portrays this, repeatedly so, within the confines of a trope that religion isn't anything other than a way for evil men to exploit the masses. Then there's the nomenclature of the game's level design, which mostly refers to aspects of Greco-Roman culture. Arcadia, the underwater forest within Rapture, is a reference to the Greek notion of harmony with nature. Neptune's bounty alludes to the Roman god of the sea. Olympus Heights is where Rapture's elites coincidentally all reside. Then there's Poseidon's Plaza. Most importantly, however, there's the Hephaestus Core and Point Prometheus, which I believe are of significant symbolic importance. In Greek mythology, Hephaestus was basically the blacksmith for the gods on Mount Olympus. He was worshipped in the manufacturing and industrial centers of ancient Greece. Now, there are differing myths, but in all of them, Hephaestus is deformed, lame, and ugly, and at one point or another is thrown from Mount Olympus into the sea. In one myth, he is rejected at birth by his mother Hera, but in another account, the god was thrown from Mount Olympus by Zeus for attempting to rescue his mother from Zeus's advances. Some writers attributed his deformity to this. Prometheus is known in Greek mythology for having defied the gods by stealing fire from Hephaestus, after which he gave it to humanity, thereby ushering in civilization. In classical Western literature, Prometheus often became a figure who represented human striving, and quite prominently, the risk of overreach that could result in unintended negative consequences. We'll tie the symbolism of these two figures together in a moment. At the outset of BioShock, the character Atlas helps you navigate the dangers of Rapture and solicits your help to rescue his wife and child, Moira and Patrick, who are trapped in a submarine. Later on in the story, upon arriving at said submarine, Andrew Ryan blows it up when Atlas tries to escape in it with his family, whom you never actually see because, as you later find out, they never actually existed. Patrick and Moira were nothing more than an invention, probably taken from one of Sander Cohen's plays. As it turns out, Frank Fontaine had faked his own death to evade Ryan's cronies, and subsequently taken on the persona of Atlas in order to subvert Ryan's society with collectivism and Christianity. Fontaine simply exploited your altruism to achieve his own selfish ends.
Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong.
But none of this is known to the player when Ryan blows up the submarine, so the player assumes that Ryan just murdered some poor Irish bloke's family in cold blood, and is now likely motivated to find and kill him. Sometime after the submarine incident, Ryan is holed up within Hephaestus, but you and Atlas are able to breach his defenses and are poised to take over Rapture when he states, quote, "Even in the old book of lies, sometimes you find truth. There is indeed a season for all things, a time to live and a time to die, a time to create and a time to destroy," unquote. He's referring to a passage within the Torah, specifically Ecclesiastes 3. And after stating this, he initiates a self-destruct sequence for the entire city, stating that he'll never let Atlas or anyone else have his city. This is also actually a very Jewish behavior. The state of Israel has something called the Samson option, which supposedly, upon the imminent defeat of the Jewish nation-state, will launch a series of nuclear countermeasures, ensuring the total destruction of the region. The name is a reference to the biblical Israelite Samson, who pushed apart the pillars of a Philistine temple, bringing down the roof and killing himself along with thousands of Philistines who had captured him.
And thus perished Samson, and with him more of his enemy than he had slain in his lifetime.
In 2002, David D. Perlmutter, with regards to the Samson option, wrote the following, quote, "The Jews understand what passive and powerless acceptance of doom has meant for them in the past, and they have ensured against it. Masada was not an example to follow. It hurt the Romans, not a whit. But Samson in Gaza? With an H-bomb? What would serve the Jew-hating world better in repayment for thousands of years of massacres but a nuclear winter? Or invite all those tut-tutting European statesmen and peace activists to join us in the ovens? For the first time in history, a people facing extermination while the world either cackles or looks away, unlike the Armenians, Tibetans, World War II European Jews, or Rwandans, have the power to destroy the world. The ultimate justice? Question mark? Unquote. In any event, you finally confront Ryan, kill him, and then take the key to Rapture off his dead body and plug it into the mainframe, which will cancel Ryan's version of the Samson option. It's then that Atlas reveals that he is in fact Frank Fontaine and that he has betrayed you.
Nice work by you all.
Thanks for everything, kid.
Point Prometheus, a level the player must explore in pursuit of Frank Fontaine after Andrew Ryan's death here, is Rapture's genetic research center, mainly focused on eugenics and the harvesting of Adam. Coincidentally, Point Prometheus was established and run by Frank Fontaine, and its activities again are tied to the downfall of Rapture. And here, we can finally make sense of Ken Levine's usage of Prometheus and Hephaestus. Andrew Ryan is Hephaestus, the creator, the smith, a titan of industry who became deformed after being cast down from Mount Olympus into the sea, after being rejected by Gentile society. Frank Fontaine is Prometheus, the clever trickster who snuck into Hephaestus' workshop and stole fire from his forge. Frank Fontaine usurped Ryan's power and ability, and this ambition had the unforeseen consequences of destroying the very utopia he sought to control.
My strength is not in steel and fire. That is what the parasites will never understand.
Note that Fontaine is not Jewish, and Ryan actually refers to him as a parasite. This is the traditional accusation of Jews being parasitical within Gentile societies, projected onto Gentiles themselves. As Wikipedia aptly states, the Jewish parasite is a notion that dates back to the time of the Enlightenment. It is based on the idea that the Jews of the diaspora are incapable of forming their own states and would therefore parasitically attack and exploit states and peoples. which are biologically imagined as organisms or people's bodies. The stereotype is often associated with the accusation of usury and the separation of creative, i.e. productive, and raffling, non-productive capital.
Imagine the will it took to create a place like this. And what have you built? Nothing. You can only loot and break. You're not a man. You're just a termite at first sight.
Now, I suspect that Andrew Ryan's constant reference to his detractors as parasites was an ironic way for Ken Levine to turn the historical tables. It was a kind of fantasy in which the Gentiles were the outsiders preying on a society derived from Jewish labor. Atlas, moreover, is a curious name. It's a reference to the Greek god holding up the heavens. The idea initially is that Atlas is seen by the player as holding the moral authority within Rapture. But the great reveal toward the end is that you had been fighting the wrong enemy all along, and that Andrew Ryan was the only one really holding together a moral society. Andrew Ryan, contrary to what most fans probably believe, was not the antagonist. He is a victim, both to the aforementioned anxieties imposed upon him in Gentile society, and an actual Gentile who came to take his city. Much of Andrew Ryan's immoral behavior can be chalked up as a reaction to Frank Fontaine's greediness and lust over Ryan's creation. Within BioShock's story, it's also revealed that Frank Fontaine not only brought down Rapture, but was also responsible for the abominable creation of the Big Daddies and Little Sisters, the latter being the method for mass-producing Adam. Adam, no doubt a religious reference to the creation myth within Genesis, quickly became all the rage after it was commercialized by Frank Fontaine to the point of exploitation. But did Fontaine discover Adam? No. It was Brigid Tenenbaum, the autistic Jewish genius.
I saw one of the smugglers having a game of catching on the docks today, and this surprised me because his hands were crippled during the war. He was unloading the barge the other day when he was bitten from the sea slug. He woke up the next morning and he found he could move his fingers for the first time in years. I asked him if he still had that sea slug. As luck would have it, he did.
Initially, Tenenbaum is quite excited at the potential prospects of her discovery, that it might heal the sick and make the weak strong. But then she gets a little carried away.
This little sea slug has come along and glued together all the crazy ideas I've had since the war. It doesn't just heal damaged cells, it resurrects them. I can bend the double helix. Black can be reborn white, tall, short, weak, strong. But the slugs alone are not enough. I'll need money. And one other thing.
The other thing Tenenbaum needed in addition to money was children. Only by implanting the sea slugs in a human host could any significant amount of Adam be produced. Sadly, the hosts had to be little girls. Hence, Frank Fontaine came up with the idea of setting up an orphanage where Tenenbaum could then implant the girls with the sea slugs.
I know why it has to be children, but why just girls? This I cannot determine why, but I know it is so. Fontaine says, one less bathroom to build in the orphanage. It is amazing to watch the effect of Adam on their small bodies. Their own cells replaced by the new stems the instant they are damaged. These children are practically invulnerable.
Now, most of this log is simply meant to convey why the player can't harm Little Sisters. But even here, Tenenbaum is depicted not so much as evil as she is absent-minded, lost in her genius, and to a lesser extent in her wonderful notions of healing people, not entirely aware that she's abusing these little girls in the process. Meanwhile, Frank Fontaine is depicted simply as cruel, crass, and calculating. This is cemented even more so in another audio diary wherein he refers to his initial conversations with Tenenbaum about the economic prospects of Adam.
Spent the morning jawing with that crowd scientist. She's damaged goods, all right. just like all those chumps they scraped out of them prison camps. But she's no crackpot. She's gonna make me the kind of scratch that'll have Ryan look like he's running a paper route. She just needs some supplies to get the ball rolling and a friend to watch her back.
Note that Fontaine is taking a jab at Jews who survived the Holocaust. Those chumps they scraped out of them prison camps. But curiously, Levine obfuscates it somewhat by referring to Tenenbaum as a kraut. Now, to Ken Levine's credit, however, one of Tenenbaum's monologues does suggest personal agency and an acknowledgement of her mistreatment of the Little Sisters.
What makes something like me? I look at genes all day long, and never do I see the blueprint of sin. I could blame the Germans, but in truth I did not find tormentors in the prison camp, but kindred spirits. These children I brutalized have awoken something inside that for most is beautiful and natural, but in me is an abomination. My maternal instinct.
But this is kind of the thing. Tenenbaum has a redemption arc whereby she deeply reflects on her actions, and she repeatedly attempts to convince the player to save the Little Sisters. Meanwhile, Frank Fontaine remains an entirely one-dimensional 2-bit villain absent any real humanity.
What do you take me for? Some kind of mental incompetent? We tossed Mother Goose's roost the moment she decided to grow a conscience.
Even some of Tenenbaum's audio logs allude to a developing hatred of Fontaine.
One of the children came and sat in my lap. I push her off. I shout, "Get away from me!" I can see the Adam oozing out of the corner of her mouth, is thick and green. Her filthy hair hanging in her face, dirty clothes, and that dead glow in her eye. I feel hatred, like I never felt before, in my chest, bitter, burning fury. I can barely breathe. And suddenly I know, it is not this child I hate.
Now, it could be that Tenenbaum is simply referring to herself here, but I suspect not. Again, it was Fontaine's idea to create the orphanages, and more importantly, it's ultimately against Fontaine that the player is pitted, not Tenenbaum. Once Ryan is dead and gone and Atlas is revealed to be Fontaine, it's also Tenenbaum who replaces Atlas as your moral compass.
What is this you wait for? Go and get this idiot!
What's more, even before Atlas is revealed to be Fontaine, he encourages you, against Tenenbaum's wishes, to harvest the atom directly from the Little Sisters, which would kill them.
The path of the righteous is not always easy, yes. The reward will become clear in time. Be patient.
Tenenbaum's playing you for a sap. Those things may look like wee little girls, but looks don't make it so. You need all the atom you can get to survive.
This was quite an easy way to prime the players to suspect Atlas's motives and later cement Fontaine's wickedness in their minds, since most young males have an innate impulse to protect young females.
Think of like what is the most understandable relationship just when you look at it visually for a few seconds. When I don't have to, you don't need any words, you don't need any explanation, you don't need any background. All you need are those silhouettes, right, of this sort of, and I think that that gives you a starting point, an emotional starting point that everybody can relate to. You have to really, if you don't feel protected towards anybody in your life, I'm not a parent, right? But I feel protected towards my wife, I feel protected towards the people I love.
Now, originally, the Big Daddies were created by Dr. Suchong to do Rapture's menial labor, but as Rapture fell into chaos after everyone got addicted to Adam, Suchong then modified the Big Daddies to guard the Little Sisters from anyone trying to harvest Adam directly from them. Now, interestingly, some of the Jewish characters actually refer to the Big Daddies as golems.
We saw our Masha today. We barely recognized her. That's her, Sam said. You're crazy, I told him. That thing? That is our Masha? But he was right. She was drawing blood out of a corpse by Fontaine Fisheries. And then when she was done, she walked off hand in hand with one of those awful golems. Masha!
Golems are a big part of Jewish folklore. Typically, a golem is an animated, anthropomorphic being created entirely from inanimate matter, often clay. Golems are essentially an extension of God's power to create Adam that only the most powerful rabbis could employ.
In Jewish folklore, there are 3 reasons to create a golem. As a way to show one's mastery of the Kabbalah, to have a trustworthy and dependable servant for labor, or to provide protection for the Jewish community.
Obviously, golems aren't real and no one has actually ever created one, but in a quote-unquote traditional sense of folklore, they were created by rabbis to provide protection for the Jewish community. The most famous story is of a 16th century rabbi in Prague who created one to protect his co-ethnics from expulsions. In any event, the Big Daddies don't really meet the quote-unquote classical definition of a golem for a number of reasons. While Masha Lutz is Jewish, most of the Little Sisters probably are not. Though supposedly in BioShock Infinite, Masha Lutz is the little sister who gives some of her Adam over to an injured Big Daddy, thereby forming the very first bond between Big Daddies and Little Sisters, the message being that Suchong mistakes an ounce of empathy for a pound of science. This is that game's way of undermining genetic determinism, although it also negates the lore in the first BioShock. In the first game, the implication is that Dr. Suchong's genetically based protection bond and protector plasmid systems had indeed worked. The irony is that he didn't know it had worked, which is what got him killed by a Big Daddy when he slapped a little sister.
Get away, you filthy little shit! What? What are you doing? Get back! Get back! Stop!
As an aside, following BioShock Infinite's logic, Masha's act of kindness would need to be repeated with each and every pair of Big Daddies and Little Sisters, which, needless to say, would be highly impractical. The Big Daddies also aren't fashioned from inanimate matter, but from actual human beings, and perhaps most importantly, they weren't created by rabbis, but by Dr. Suchong, a Chinese Gentile. But this potentially ties into BioShock's thematic implication that the Gentiles in Rapture can't handle the power of creation, and their effort to do so only leads to chaos. Though admittedly, in an audio log, Dr. Suchong states that the conversion process is one way, and then he implies that Andrew Ryan is supplying him with candidates. The second game fleshes this out more, stating that these candidates came from a prison, but as I said earlier, I'm not factoring in the second game here. Just remember that in the first game, Andrew Ryan only becomes involved in Little Sister and Big Daddy activities once he nationalizes Fontaine Futuristics. He's simply responding to, quote-unquote, market forces. Adam, Big Daddies, and Little Sisters were never really his ideas.
Something must be done about Fontaine. While I was buying buildings and fish futures, he was cornering the market on genotypes and nucleotide sequences. Rapture is transforming before my eyes. The great chain is pulling away from me. Perhaps it's time to give it a tug.
The Golem themes, however, go beyond the Big Daddies. The voiceless protagonist, Jack, is somewhat of a Golem himself. Like the Big Daddies, he too was the creation of Dr. Suchong, but curiously, he's also the offspring of Andrew Ryan and Jasmine Jolene, a very blonde and Aryan-looking exotic dancer in one of Rapture's clubs. Jasmine, after being impregnated by Ryan, sold the egg, unbeknownst to Ryan, to Dr. Suchong and Frank Fontaine. The two men then manipulated the embryo to serve as their ace in the hole to bypass all of Ryan's genetically based security measures. Note that there is semantic overlap between the Hebrew word golem and embryo.
That creepy Dr. Tenenbaum promised me it wasn't going to be a real pregnancy. They'd just take the egg out once Mr. Ryan and I had... Oh, I needed the money so bad. But I know Mr. Ryan's going to suss it out. Gonna know I wasn't being careful. Gonna know I sold the... Mr. Ryan's going to be so mad at me.
Now, we'll get more into Jack's golem-like nature, but for now, let's discuss this Jasmine Jolene, Andrew Ryan affair. In many ways, it really piggybacks off old historical tropes of Jewish men lusting after European women, whom are sometimes referred to as shiksas.
So now the other Lippman kissed me.
Oh, sure. They're Jewish and you're a shiksa.
What?
It means non-Jewish woman.
I know what it means, but what does being a shiksa have to do with it?
You've got shiksa appeal. Jewish men love the idea of meeting a woman that's not like their mother.
Oh, that's insane.
I'll tell you what's insane. The price that I could get you on a new desktop computer.
I am not buying a computer from you.
There's porn.
Even so.
Now, while some people might make the case that the word shiksa is neutral or benign, it's of Yiddish origin, but is derived from the Hebrew term sheketz, meaning abomination, impure, or object of loathing. Shiksa usually refers to a non-Jewish woman with a connotation of being a whore.
My boy's a man today. Can you believe it? He's a man.
Congratulations, Dad.
I'm a man!
Tongue?
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't try that till I was 23.
Well, this kid's not just a man, he's a man's man.
And I think he's been telling his friends. I got invitations to 6 more bar mitzvahs.
It can be argued that shishkas are viewed by Jewish men as a kind of vessel to sow their oats without dishonoring a good Jewish girl. Whatever the case, Jewish Hollywood has had a pretty long tradition of pairing Jewish men with waspy Gentile women. As Hadley Freeman writes in a Guardian piece, quote, "Thanks in no small part to Woody Allen, you see this trope in every rom-com starring actors such as Ben Stiller, Seth Rogen, Adam Sandler, opposite the likes of Jennifer Aniston, Katherine Heigl, Drew Barrymore," unquote.
Well, if it isn't the long-lost Andrew Ryan. Come here, tiger.
In addition to all this, there's actually a pretty significant sex trade in Israel, whereby Eastern European women are trafficked. According to a 1998 report from the Israel Women's Network, quote, "The women are trafficked, most frequently from Russia, Ukraine, the Baltic states, South Africa, and the Dominican Republic. According to Israel's CEDAW report, more than 95% of the women deported from Israel for illegal prostitution are repatriated to the former Soviet Union," unquote. Now, there are no official numbers regarding the exact extent of prostitution or human trafficking in Israel, but the same report states, quote, "Esther Eilem, a sociologist and expert on prostitution, estimates that the total number of prostitutes in Israel is between 8,000 and 10,000. The actual figure may be far higher. Professor Menachem Amir of Hebrew University, an expert on organized crime in Israel, estimates that 70% of the women working in prostitution in Tel Aviv are from Russia and other former Soviet republics," unquote. A police chief from the small Israeli city Haifa explains just how lucrative the prostitution model was in 1998. Quote, "If we are to talk about money, take for example a girl with 20 clients each day who pay 150 shekels, about $40 each. The girls earn 3,000 shekels, about $850 per day if they do not work very hard. There are places here with 10 girls. 25 days? Work with 5 girls is 375,000 shekels, over $100,000. That is what the pimp makes each month. He gives the girls 300 shekels, $85 a day, under the best of conditions," unquote. While some of these women knowingly entered the sex trade, albeit under particular pretenses that are later violated, some of these women actually have advanced degrees and were lured into the country under false pretenses. Afterwards, the usual story is that their passports are stolen and then they're sold at a private auction into sex slavery for somewhere around $10,000. Then they're told they have to work off that debt to the buyer. Typically, if the authorities do catch them, the women are simply deported and treated as illegal aliens, not victims of kidnapping. By and large, the consular officials feel helpless to deal with the problem. The Russian vice consul, Igor Alexeyev, told investigators, quote, "We have the impression that the police are not interested in this. They do not bother to find out how the women got here. They just want to deport the women as quickly as possible," unquote. Perhaps this is because quick deportation actually assists the pimp's business model. In the words of one critic, quote, "The police are used by the pimps for their own purposes. The pimps call the police to visit their establishments when they are finished with the girls. The women are sent back from Israel as they came, and the pimps are enriched twice. First, they need not pay the final installment of the women's salaries. Second, the cost of returning the women to Russia is handled by the national budget. Meanwhile, the pimp is able to get a new shipment of fresh meat," unquote. It's honestly very hard to determine just how many of these women came to Israel of their own volition, as many women are reluctant to share their stories due to fear of reprisals. Again, some of these women chose to be prostitutes, but one, even those who chose to participate in the trade, almost always chose to do so out of desperation. And second, they are still typically abused afterwards and often robbed of their earnings. A 19-year-old Slavic woman shares her story here. Quote, "One day I came home and $4,000 had been stolen from my apartment. I had to start all over again. My pimp admitted that he had stolen the money. He knew that I wanted to take the money home and leave, so he stole my money. Then he fined me for complaining to him. He would fine us 1,000 shekels or 500 shekels for infractions. I told him I had a child to take care of. He said he didn't care at all for my child. I threatened to run away from the Makon. He demanded that I give him money to pay the fines. When I complained again, he fined me 150 shekels per word. My complaint cost me 1,500 shekels in fines. He refused to give me any money back. He fined me for telling him the truth. My pimp knew that we were here as tourists. He knew that we were in a strange country and that we had no rights," unquote. Now, to be fair, Israel has gone from a Tier 3 nation in the international ranking alongside Brazil and other nations to a Tier 1 nation in 2012. They've made several changes in legislation to address sex trafficking. However, despite these efforts, they recently were demoted to a Tier 2 status. In any event, yes, Andrew Ryan being paired with Jasmine Jolene is building off the trope that Jewish men enjoy casual sex with European women.
I didn't know Fontaine had something to do with it. What are you doing? No, don't, please. I loved you, don't, please, no.
Let us now return to our voiceless, golem-like protagonist. After being born, Jack was subjected to gene therapy to induce accelerated growth. Then he was imprinted with a series of false memories and subsequently smuggled out of Rapture to serve as a sleeper agent for Fontaine. He was activated while flying over the Atlantic with the phrase, "Would you kindly?" He hijacked the plane, crashed it into the ocean, and then swam to the lighthouse to carry out Fontaine's commands. Now, it's never really explained why he doesn't remember hijacking the plane, but he finds out, or remembers, once he confronts his father. Curiously though, even here we have a man with Jewish heritage who arguably committed a bunch of heinous crimes, but whose culpability is called into question because said crimes were really the result of a power-hungry goy who used and abused him. The tragedy of all this is made potentially all the more potent by the fact that Jack knowingly, albeit unwillingly, kills his own father, who himself knows that Jack is his son.
And now that I see you flesh to flesh and blood to blood, I know I cannot raise my hand against you. But know this, you are my greatest disappointment.
But Jack, that is, the player, probably doesn't understand the suggestion entirely until the great reveal of "Would you kindly?", wherein you see a series of notes and audio logs explaining how and why Jack was created. After the reveal, Jack confronts his father, who engages in a monologue about how a man chooses and a slave obeys. He demonstrates to Jack how Fontaine has manipulated him to be a slave, and then, shockingly, he orders Jack to kill him. Now, there are several interpretations of this scene and what it all means. The typical is that it's a throwback to an extremist view of objectivism. You, the protagonist, Jack, are not free, unlike Ryan, because all your actions are due to Fontaine's control. At this point, Ryan realizes that he's been defeated, so he chooses to die by Jack's hand, whereas Jack, a slave, has no choice but to obey the order. Ryan thus demonstrates that he is a man and you are a slave. There's definitely something to this, but it doesn't quite add up either. For instance, Ryan demonstrated that he had just as much control over Jack with the "would you kindly" phrase as did Fontaine. and thus he easily could have ordered Jack to go after Fontaine, or even kill himself, as Fontaine attempted to do later on.
Would you kindly go get stepped on by a big daddy?
But why would Ryan tell his own son to kill himself? Even if he is disappointed in Jack, that sentiment reveals expectations, which in turn suggest he cares about Jack's outcome. What I suspect on some level is that Ryan wanted his son to become a man by ridding himself of Fontaine's grip. Ryan's monologue to Jack about how a man chooses and a slave obeys is probably meta-commentary on how players lack agency in games, but given the context, it seems equally plausible that Ryan's monologue was a call for Jewish agency to stop being the victim of the Goyim. Again, it's at this point that Tenenbaum becomes your moral compass and helps you rid yourself of Fontaine's mind control so that you can kill him, thus enacting revenge for all of Fontaine's Jewish victims. Fontaine, in the very end, even takes on the form of a kind of warped Nazi Übermensch, and at certain points, Tenenbaum draws parallels between Fontaine and the Germans.
As the respectable labs have all turned me away, I have turned to Fontaine's smugglers in Port Neptune for supplies. Fontaine's men are pigs. They spit, they stink. But they deliver, and they don't ask questions. They're all terrified of Fontaine. He reminds me a bit of the Germans. So efficient. It wouldn't surprise me if he were soon running things down here.
Now, returning to the Greek symbolism, again, Fontaine represents Prometheus, that is, the theft from the gods, and the tendency for man to overreach his grasp. Curiously, this symbolism isn't even unique to BioShock. The recent reboot of the Wolfenstein series is about an alternate timeline wherein the Nazis win World War II and have advanced in almost supernatural ways by the 1960s. But only because they stole all their technology from a mystical order of Jewish scientists called the Da'at Yeshud.
The technology developed at Da'at Yeshud is centuries ahead of anything you've ever seen or imagined, and highly dangerous in the wrong hands. The Nazis found our safekeeping. They stole our secrets. They used them to win the war. Everything they have accomplished, everything was built upon our knowledge. But
in BioShock, Tenenbaum, the Jewish scientist, initially saw Adam as a way to cure the sick and heal the wounded, but Fontaine saw it as a path to power and corrupted her efforts, just like he did Ryan's rapture. Underneath all the Ayn Rand objectivist dystopian themes, this is the central thesis in BioShock, that Jews are powerful beings with the ability to do great good or harm, that any immoral behavior on their part is due to how Gentiles have historically treated them. And I should stress here that this isn't really my own idea. Ken Levine is the one saying it. Quote, "Rapture, like Israel, is a response to oppression. It's a response to a fear of future oppression. It's an extremely radical one, but it's not that different than starting a state in the Middle East. It's a radical solution to a radical problem." Unquote. Andrew Ryan's behavior is a response to Frank Fontaine's encroachment on his territory, just how his initial creation of Rapture was a response to Gentile hostility on the surface. Essentially, Ken is stating that even when Jews are the oppressors, they're still in fact the victims of past oppression. Again, Tenenbaum was an autistic Jewish genius, abused and corrupted by Nazi scientists, and then, upon her arrival in Rapture, was taken advantage of again by Frank Fontaine in order to commercialize the atom she discovered in the sea slugs. Dr. Steinman was a well-respected surgeon who lost his mind once Fontaine had corrupted Rapture with his commercialization of Adam. As the wiki states, quote, "An accomplished surgeon, Steinman rose to a degree of prominence throughout Rapture, but Adam abuse caused him to lose his grip on reality. Dr. Steinman, growing so utterly obsessed with making his patients beautiful, began to hallucinate Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of beauty, and looked upon her down the road of insanity." Unquote. Ken Levine couches Steinman's behavior as the result of his addiction to Adam in conjunction with his rejection of Judaism. Adam expands Steinman's rebellious spirit not to be held back by any outside force to unhealthy, monstrous levels. This does make some sense, but nevertheless, it's still quite bizarre that Ken felt the audience could deduce such a message when Steinman, surrounded by 3 corpses nailed to crosses, was yelling about the Greek goddess Aphrodite. Was this about scapegoating Christianity and Greco-Roman identities, or was it about an internal Jewish identity crisis? How exactly was Steinman's behavior the result of other people in America defining him by his Jewishness? Sander Cohen, the Jewish artist and entertainer who went mad and became sadistically impassive to the suffering of others as Rapture collapsed into civil war, might also blame his behavior on Fontaine's actions. But more broadly, he's simply another Jew lost in his own genius. Again, this is an extremely consistent theme. It's not entirely dissimilar to the theme in the Jewish film The Believer, wherein a brilliant Jewish child becomes lost in his own internal conflict over religion and becomes a neo-Nazi. Cohen's level in the game is of particular interest because from a progression standpoint, it's almost completely imposed on the player, who simply needs to get to the Hephaestus core. While in transit from Fort Frolic to Hephaestus, Cohen submerges the bathysphere you need to progress, and then forces you to murder and photograph all his former disciples in order to continue the game. Again, Cohen is Hebrew for priest, a curious nomenclature given his desire for you to murder his disciples, who had been his artistic students. What's more, if you pay attention, there are several undertones of abusive homosexual behavior on Cohen's part. Cobb, in an audio log, states that the only reason he ever liked Cohen was because the latter paid his rent, and in an encounter states, quote, "It's all a game, errand boy. Cohen, Ryan, 2 old birds pulling on each other's milk sticks." Finnegan calls Cohen a fruit, and Rodriguez actually screams at the player, "The things that man had me do." Curiously, none of Cohen's disciples are Jewish. So what we have here is the player being forced to kill the Gentile men, a Jewish priest, sexually abused and dominated. To be clear, there is no way to circumvent this. The player has to murder these people, or Cohen simply won't let you leave Fort Frolic. Or rather, Ken Levine won't let you leave Fort Frolic. There's no way for you to side with the victims or confront Cohen on any of his behavior. This is a somewhat disturbing observation, considering just how often Ken Levine and Irrational Games made a meta-commentary on how the players have no choice in video games and are forced to do what the developers want. The question naturally arises, why did Ken Levine want you to murder a bunch of victims of a Jewish homosexual? Let's listen to one of Cohen's audio logs entitled The Wild Bunny.
The Wild Bunny by Sander Cohen. I want to take the ears off, but I can't. I hop, and when I hop, I never get off the ground. It's my curse, my eternal curse. I want to take the ears off, but I can't. It's my curse. It's my fucking curse. I want to take the ears off. Please, take them off. Please.
Note that Levine wrote both Cohen's character as well as this particular audio log. Then consider Levine's own words again about the Jewishness of BioShock. Quote, "It was less about faith and more about what their Jewishness meant to others. Ryan's bourgeois family was ruined by the Bolsheviks. Tenenbaum's family was slaughtered by the Nazis. Cohen and Steinman were cultural American Jews. But, in that time, others defined them by their Jewishness." Unquote. In my opinion, The Wild Bunny is about a personal struggle as a Jew in a world of Gentiles. Cohen is tired of pretending to be something he isn't. When he tries to hop like all the other bunnies, he can't get off the ground. He can't assimilate. Being Jewish is thus his eternal curse, because he simply can't be a rabbit. But don't take my word for it. Take Ken Levine's. Quote, "There's literal displacement, and then there's a feeling of not fitting in, of, I don't really belong here. I think Jews are always going to feel a little bit like they don't belong wherever they are. There's always that, what if we have to flee mentality," unquote. Of course, instead of fleeing, Cohen murdered everyone around him who had rejected him, the doubters, as he called them, and this even included women and children.
Rapture is going to hell. And why? Because of them. Always behind the scenes, at the Lyceum, at the galleries in Soho, even down here in this so-called utopia. The doubters.
The idea seems to be that the men, women, and children of his dwelling doubted his artistic talent and genius. In the Game Informer piece, Ken Levine states that Cohen always felt, quote, constrained by little people, unquote. Now, does it not naturally follow from his statements that to be culturally Jewish in America is thus to be constrained, in some sense, by little people? Cohen's murderous rampage in Fort Frolic also seems somewhat reminiscent of Jewish revenge fantasies. To not be a victim of the Goyim, who may once again be engaging in a periodic pogrom, but to lash out against them. Again, this is a big theme in the Jewish film, The Believer, which sadly we don't really have the time to get into here. Of additional interest to me is that BioShock's fanbase seems to admire Sander Cohen and Fort Frolic as much as Sander Cohen admires his own sadistic Quad-Teak. One might say that fans even felt a certain sympathy for Cohen, which I suspect may have been Levine's goal, especially if Cohen was meant as any kind of personal self-reflection. Everyone gawked and marveled at how Irrational Games had Cohen use a spotlight on the player to indicate that they were the star of Cohen's play, but no one really stopped to consider that they were the star of Ken Levine's play. Ultimately, Ken Levine could have given you a way to circumvent Cohen's orders for you to murder the little people. Now, technically, you can kill Cohen afterwards, thereby unlocking the achievement Irony, but the game certainly doesn't coax you to do this, and if you look at player stats, most people did not do this. Again, the most important thing to remember here is that you cannot refuse to kill his disciples. In the end, the developers really wanted you to do Cohen's bidding, and the question is, why? What high-minded, artsy-fartsy notions were they exploring exactly? Jordan Thomas, Fort Frolic's level designer, tells us that, quote, the idea was that you could explore the mind of a man who was a sort of refraction of Ryan and company. Like Ryan, he tried to remake the world to fit his vision, but he was so flawed as an artist, even that was escaping his control. He didn't fully understand his own work or his own damage, unquote. Now, to me, it seems a bit bizarre that Thomas suggests that Cohen perhaps didn't fully understand that he was murdering people and covering them with plaster. But Thomas curiously also doesn't seem to couch Cohen's behavior in victimhood. He seems to have been much more inspired by old horror films like Psycho. As far as I know, though, Thomas isn't Jewish, so maybe he isn't looking at Cohen's character the same way as Levine and other Jews. Cody Klein, the author of the Kotaku article, posits that even though Cohen never had to deal with the horrors of the Holocaust or terror of displacement, he, quote, still felt like he didn't belong in America, unquote, and retained a lingering fear that, quote, the past could repeat itself, unquote. Cody also states that Cohen reveals a critical layer to BioShock's themes. Quote, if the trauma of the past still controls our present, how much control do we really have? It's a question many Jews grappled with after the Holocaust, and one many still grapple with today. The worst gift that oppression gives is more oppression. It's a traumatic cycle that can swallow up those caught in its wake. The fear of oppression yet to come is a nasty, insidious thing, and neither Tenenbaum nor Ryan nor the player are fully capable of escaping it. Ryan's obsession with the great chain of industry is apt, although history ends up becoming the heaviest link in that chain, unquote. To me, this is somewhat a roundabout way of giving a carte blanche to the abhorrent behavior of Jews, both in Rapture and in real life. It's saying everything they do that might be seen as objectionable is essentially a response to past oppression. They are not the prime movers, but merely reactors. It's dressed up in fairly sophisticated rhetoric, but really it amounts to little more than a historically epic, they started it. And that typically occupies a certain position within most people's moral hierarchy.
Yes!
Regarding the contrast between the first and third games in the series, Cody states, quote, BioShock Infinite, the 2013 follow-up, also directed by Levine, might be obsessed with the cyclical nature of history as a concept, but the original BioShock is just as concerned with the personal toll those cycles have on people, particularly Jews, unquote. In very, very stark contrast, while the first game implicitly addresses Jewishness, BioShock Infinite explicitly addresses concepts such as white separatism, American jingoism, racism, and Christian zealotry. And it's done in such a way that is likely highly accessible to the majority of the player base. Now, I haven't run through the entire first game here because I intend to do so for BioShock Infinite, which we're about to delve into. For the sake of anyone who has not played through the first game, it ends with Jack, Andrew Ryan's son, killing Frank Fontaine, or rather it ends with Jack weakening Fontaine to the point where a bunch of little sisters are able to accost him with atom-draining syringes. We'll play out the ending sequence here, since it's fairly short.
I had you built! I sent you topside! I called you back, showed you what you was capable of! Even that life you thought you had, that was something I dreamed up and had tattooed inside your head! Now if you don't call that family, I don't know what is! And now...
They offered you this city. And you refused it. And what did you do instead? What I've come to expect of you. You saved them. You gave them the one thing that was stolen from them. A chance. A chance to learn. To find love. To live. And in the end, what was your reward? You never said. But I think I know. A family.
So to me, the ending speaks to young male Gentiles more than it does to Jews. It tells young white men that they shouldn't seek power, that they ought to free their women from an oppressive patriarchy so that they can pursue higher education, and that their women will find true love by miscegenating with foreigners. And in response, these young male gamers who feel alienated from women today will be loved by them and finally have a sense of family. Again, I don't believe 15 to 25-year-olds circa 2007 knew much, if anything, about Jews beyond a Spielberg film, so it's likely that, at the time, they didn't see Jack as a messianic Jew exorcising Fontaine's parasitical demons from children. Rapture for them was an internal struggle among white people, not an inter-ethnic conflict between Jews and Gentiles. There really do appear to be two distinct interwoven narratives, one for Jews and one for Gentiles. But oddly, the Jewish themes were discussed under a veil of Christian and Gentile elements. Of course, this isn't unique to Ken Levine, since Neil Druckmann literally laid out the entire Israeli-Palestinian conflict via proxies in The Last of Us Part 2, and in many ways, he scapegoated Jewish sins onto Gentile avatars. We can also see this in action if we return to Tenenbaum's audio log wherein she discusses the initial prospects of Adam.
I can bend the double helix. Black can be reborn white, tall, short, weak, strong.
Note that she refers to the changing of black people to white, as if being black were an error that could be corrected by being turned white. This is something that Dr. Steinman references as well in another audio log.
Ryan and Adam. Adam and Ryan. All those years of study, and was I ever truly a surgeon before I met them? How we clinked away with our scalpels and toy morality. Yes, we could lop a boil here and shave down a beak there, but could we really change anything? No. But Adam gives us the means to do it. And Ryan frees us from the phony ethics that held us back. Change your look, change your sex, change your race. It's yours to change. Nobody else's.
Now, it's indeed curious that here we have two Jews implying that being black is an error to be corrected. Again, as far as most players knew, however, Tenenbaum and Steinman were just two more racist white people, lost in a paradigm of white supremacy. Moreover, one of Ken Levine's motifs was that the Jews of Rapture were damaged by their time within Gentile society. As Cody Klein in the Kotaku article stated, quote, Tenenbaum, a German Jew who actually helped the infamous Nazi doctor Josef Mengele with his terrible experiments on prisoners in the concentration camps, also ends up aping her oppressors. She brings Mengele's horrific methods, especially those used on children, to Rapture, producing the Little Sisters in the process, unquote. Again, I have to reiterate that the game is very vague about these themes. This factoid about Josef Mengele, for example, can't be found within the actual game itself, but has been confirmed by Ken Levine as part of Tenenbaum's backstory elsewhere. Either way, in the end, BioShock's bizarrely implicit paradigm of Jewish victimhood seeks to blame morally abhorrent Jewish behavior on past experiences. If Jews have done bad things since World War II, it's still the fault of anti-Semites, past and present. Again, the plasmid market wasn't even Ryan's idea, it was Frank Fontaine's. Thus, Ryan's arguable embrace of it was him reluctantly, even stubbornly, adhering to his extreme free market principles, which he thought would eventually solve the problems Fontaine had brought to Rapture. That is really the extent to which the game truly criticizes Andrew Ryan.
There has been tremendous pressure to regulate this plasmid business. There have been side effects, blindness, insanity, death. But what use is our ideology if it is not tested? The market does not respond like an infant, shrieking at the first sign of displeasure. The market is patient, and we must be too.
Now, this is so interesting because on one hand, Andrew Ryan is basically criticized for being too individualistic, to the point that he allows a greedy capitalist controlling a kind of Christian collectivism to overtake his libertarian paradise. Remember, despite the name, Atlas is not John Galt. Andrew Ryan is. It's ironic in retrospect given the current plight of European nationalists. We are a people plagued by individualist thought paradigms as huge swaths of alien collectivist peoples swarm into our societies. And that's the best part. In a certain sense, Ken Levine is attacking Ryan's individualism. But he also views white Christian collectivism as equally bad, based on how it's portrayed in this and his subsequent game. I suspect that Ken doesn't like Jews being too libertarian and individualistic because such ideologies leave Jews vulnerable to other people's collective utopian visions.